bless you today. Welcome to our Cornerstone Wow, our Word on Wednesday. I'm Pastor A.T. Curry. Thank you for sharing with us on today. I'm super excited about our study. We are in the midst of a wonderful series dealing with developing a heart for God. Developing a heart for God. It's such an important ideal and thought when you really take time and reflect upon it. Because Jesus told us that where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. And so, having a heart for God, developing a heart for God, simply means that we ought to treasure God in such a way. We ought to revere, honor, respect, love, and appreciate God in such a way that we develop a heart for Him. When you develop a heart for God, you don't have to second guess yourself all the time. You don't have to stop what you're doing and ask the question before you do something. Now, what would Jesus do? But when you have a heart for God, your actions will automatically follow. They'll automatically follow the decisions that come from your heart. And so what you do will automatically be what the Lord would do. And so it's important for us to develop a heart for God. It plays an important part in our daily decision making. Having a heart for God, doing that which pleases God, having such an affection for God that you want to do what's pleasing in His holy sight. A heart for God, where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. Do you have a high value? Do you have a high appraisal of God? If so, that certainly will lead to you having a heart for God. In this series, we've seen episodes from the life of David, the one of whom it is said that he was the apple of God's eye, the one of whom it was said he certainly had a heart for God. But yet, in spite of all of that, we see here where he faces a challenge that he really loses. Yes, David. I know it sounds unusual to hear of David losing a battle. After all, even in this series, we've seen where he was protecting his father Jesse's sheep, and one day had to kill a lion. Another time he had to kill a bear. When standing up for the army of God, he even killed a giant named Goliath. But here we find him losing. He's losing to a giant. It's not Goliath, but it's a giant called temptation. That's what we find here in 2 Samuel chapter 11. And we're going to see here where temptation is such a giant, it's diabolical. Satan uses it in such a strategic manner. He won't always tempt you with something that is so large, enormous, and something that you would normally be on guard for. But we see in 2 Samuel 11 that so often the devil tempts you, the tempter tempts you with subtle steps. They are subtle little steps, but they lead to a great devastation and fall. Listen, there are some steps that you and I can take to help us not be defeated by this giant called temptation, but in fact to beat this giant called temptation. Listen, verse 1, 2 Samuel chapter 11, with the New International Version on today. It says in verse 1, in the spring. That's reason to pause right there, in the spring. Why is it so significant that the recorder of the text would mention what time of the year it was that what we're about to read is going to take place. It's important because it was in that time of the year when kings would go off to war. It's in the springtime in ancient battles when kings would go to battle. But here it says, in the spring, at the time when kings go off to war, David sent Joab out with the king's men and the whole Israelite army. They destroyed the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah. But listen to what the Bible says at the end of that first verse. It says, but David remained in Jerusalem. Notice the first thing that leads to David yielding and giving in to temptation is he's in the wrong place at the wrong time. The Bible says in the spring he's supposed to be out, but he ends up at home in Jerusalem in the palace. Brothers and sisters, I think I'll mention to you that you could avoid a whole lot of temptation by staying out of the wrong place at the wrong time. Just being caught up at the wrong time will expose you to some things that you would not encounter at the right time. Being in a place at the wrong time, you're not catching it. Wrong time, wrong time, wrong time. Listen, you can talk about how strong you are. You see someone else yield to temptation, and you say, man, I would never do that. How could that person allow themselves to do that? Well, you don't know what you would do if you at a place at the wrong time. The circumstances of the time can make you do what you would think you would not do. The wrong time. He's in the wrong time. He's at the wrong time, and he's at the wrong place. One thing's for certain to avoid certain temptation, and that is to not put yourself in position to even be tempted by the thing in the first place. I was talking to a person who was trying to lose weight. This was before the pandemic, and they said they were walking. I said, well, great, where are you walking? They said, I'm walking in the mall. In the mornings, walking in the mall. I said, okay, well, what part of the mall are you walking in? They said, the food court. They're in the wrong place at the wrong time. If you're trying to avoid temptations, you have to not allow yourself to be put in a place where it's so easy to be exposed to that which you would normally feel tempted by. David, he's at home in the palace. It's the wrong time. It's the wrong place. It's springtime. He ought to be on the battlefield. He's in the palace at Jerusalem. Not only is he in the wrong place at the wrong time, but verse 2 says, one evening David got up from his bed and walked around on the roof of the palace. Walked around on the roof of the palace. From the roof, he saw a woman bathing. The woman was very beautiful. That's verse 2. Notice, if you will, there's nothing wrong with David walking around on the rooftop of his palace. However, the late great theologian Martin Luther, not Martin Luther Jr., but the theologian of old, Martin Luther, once remarked that you cannot keep birds from flying over your head, but you can keep them from building a nest on top of your head. And so there's nothing wrong with David being on the rooftop, but yet when he sees this woman bathing from afar, and the woman was very beautiful, he did not stop the bird from nesting on top of his head. He kept looking at what he was looking at. And so the first thing we see about this situation is not only could you avoid so many temptations by not being at the right place at the wrong time, but you can also avoid it by not looking at the wrong thing. He's in the wrong place. He's at the wrong time. But now he's looking at the wrong thing. The fact of the matter is, what you expose yourself to will so often end up exposing you. What you expose yourself to. That's why you got to be careful what you look at, what you expose yourself to, what you listen to, the type of music, the type of shows, movies that you watch, what you're doing on the internet, all that, whatever you expose yourself to, your mind is like a sponge. It absorbs, whether consciously or subconsciously, sometimes even unconsciously. It absorbs that which you are exposed to. And you do know what goes in you has to somehow, one way or another, come out of you. It has to express itself out of you. What you ingest ends up being digested, and then, if you're not careful, it'll end up congesting. What you expose yourself to can so often end up exposing you. And so he's on the rooftop of the palace. He's in Jerusalem. It's in the spring. It's at the wrong time. He's in the wrong place. Now he's exposing himself to the wrong thing. Nothing wrong with him being on the roof. But when he sees this beautiful woman bathing, he doesn't stop looking. He allows the bird to nest in his head. And verse 3 says, and David sent someone to find out about her. So now he's inquiring about the wrong thing. he inquires a fella about this woman. The man said, she is Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, and she's the wife of Uriah the Hittite. Verse 4, then David sent messengers to get her. Lord have mercy. She came to him. He slept with her. Now she was purifying herself from her month uncleanness. Then she went back home. The Bible goes on to talk about how she conceived and sent word back to David that she is expecting a child by him. Notice that being in the wrong place at the wrong time and then exposing yourself to the wrong thing are subtle steps that lead to much larger consequences. It's not a big thing at one time, but it's little things that you allow to continue to expose yourself to, and that you become infected by it, and it ends up picking momentum up. And it's hard to, listen, the longer you stay in it, the harder it is to come out of it. Listen, what I'm trying to tell you, he's in the wrong place, he's at the wrong time, he's checking out the wrong thing, he gets so caught up with it, he gets consumed by it. He inquires, who is this beautiful woman I'm watching? The fella says, that's Uriah's wife that you're looking at. Instead of cutting it off right there, he just gets consumed by the ideal, the infatuation of the matter. And the point I'm trying to get you to see is not only will what you are exposed to end up exposing you, but what you are consumed with will end up consuming you. What you are consumed with will end up consuming you. Yeah, it's in the text. It really is. It really is. What you get so caught up with will end up exposing you, and what you become consumed with will end up consuming you. And so David sent word to Joab, send me Uriah the Hittite. That's Bathsheba's husband. He comes to her. You know the rest of the story. David eventually has him put on the front line at the war and then has the other troops to withdraw while he's out there. He ends up dying. He ends up being killed at war, but unplanned by David. So do several of other David's men end up dying. Notice that David's actions don't simply affect himself, but they affect others as well. It raises the question today, how much does the potential consequences of your actions affect your behavior? How much? How much does the possible consequences of one's actions affect their behavior? What determines how much thought you give to the consequence of your actions? Consequence of your actions. How much thought do you give into that? What determines how much a person thinks about the consequence of their actions? You see, that question really gives you an idea of how much a person fears and reveres God. You ever see some people do some things that are just so unconscionable? You think about former President Trump. You say, well, how could a person do such a devilish thing? How could he do such despicable things? Well, if you don't have any fear of the consequences of your actions, there's no telling what he would do, no telling what he has done that we still are finding out about now. But when you do recognize that there is a God who sees all and knows all and is watching all, and that we have to give an account of what we do, you can't help but at times to think about the consequence of your decisions. But here's the good part. When you have a heart for God, you don't always have to question yourself. Because if you have a heart for God, your actions will automatically be actions that would be pleasing in God's sight. Doesn't mean you won't have temptations. But God can give you the ability to overcome your temptations. We have an instance here in the life of David, a man who had a heart for God, but yet he's tempted and he falls. He yields to the temptation. And not only that, but we discover here that there's a difference between having an idle mind and a stressed mind. Now, which one of those leaves a person more susceptible to temptation? Is it having an idle mind, or is it having a stressed mind? I'm sure perhaps you've heard that expression, an idle mind is what? The devil's workshop. That's what many people hold, but this text is indicating that no, it's not just an idle mind that's the devil's workshop. It's a stressed mind. If you're not careful, a stressed mind can so often lead to one yielding to temptation. You remember when Satan calls himself tempting Jesus, 40 days in the desert. He doesn't tempt Jesus because Jesus is idle. Jesus is never just idle. He's always been about his Father's business. But the devil, he tempts Jesus when he thinks Jesus is stressed. Now, you deduct that from knowing that he tempts him with, for one, bread. He doesn't tempt him with bread because he's idle. He tempts him with bread because he thinks Jesus is stressed from being hungry. And so he says, turn these stones to bread. Jesus tells the man, get thee behind me, Satan. The man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God. What's the point? It's not just an idle mind that can lead one to yield to temptation. It's a stress mind. And so whenever you know you are getting stressed, that's the time your alarm, your alert system ought to be on high to make sure you don't yield to temptation at that time, because that's when the enemy wants to really tempt you, when you are stressed. And so it's not just about being idle, but being stressed. Be careful of decisions you make when you are stressed. Whenever a top Fortune 100 company in the world sends an executive on a flight across seas for so many hours, they never allow the executive to attend a meeting in a foreign country within 8 hours of their arrival there. It's just the natural stress that's involved in travel that can affect a person's decision. And so when a top country, a Fortune 100, 500 company sends an executive to a meeting far away, they aren't even allowed to make any decisions when they first get there. They have to have time to settle down and get themselves together. Stress can cause you so often to yield to temptation that you would not normally do. David is stressed. He's at a stress moment, and he ends up yielding to the temptation at this time. Yeah. It's interesting further that some people will say that power corrupts a person. I don't hold that position. I don't think power corrupts a person. I think power puts a person into position where they can become corrupted, but it's not the power that corrupts a person. What power and money usually does, it doesn't corrupt a person, it usually just exposes the person. If they were liberal, if they were a generous person, when they didn't have much and then get more, they usually just become more liberal. If they were stingy when they didn't, they usually just become more stingy the more that they get. And so it doesn't necessarily change a person, but more so reveals the person. It was asked, is a person more likely to yield to temptation if they are in a position where they have much, or is one more likely to yield to a position where they have little and less? That's quite a thought. I believe the Bible teaches us that the temptation, first of all, there's no respecter of persons. So an individual in either situations can be tempted the same. What makes the difference in yielding to the temptation is not one's economic status, but it's one's heart. A person with a heart for God might not have much, seemingly, materially speaking, but yet won't yield to the temptation of doing anything in order to get money. Like so, a person with much money, if they don't have a heart for God, there's nothing they won't do to get more money. It's all about the person's heart. Jesus again says, where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. And so a person who has much, materialistically speaking, much money, may very well put their treasure, put their hopes and their heart in their treasure. They become more concerned, as we said in our previous study, about their provisions than they are about the provider. But the one who has little, if their heart is in God, it doesn't matter much if they have little or not. If they have a heart for God, their joy does not come from creature comforts, but it comes from having a heart and relationship with the Creator. It's that person's heart who makes all the difference, that makes all the difference. And so the songwriter of old put it best when they reminded us to yield not to temptation, for yielding is sin, but each victory will help you some other to win. Fight manfully onward, dark passions subdue, and then here's the key, look ever to Jesus, and he will carry you through. And so I pray this study today has been a blessing to you as we develop a heart for God. Remember that you can help fight off temptation by not being out there at the wrong time, not hanging out at the wrong place, not exposing yourself to the wrong thing, and not be consumed by the wrong matter. But in the end and final analysis, look to Jesus. From him comes all of our help and all of our strength. And I'm excited about next week's study because although David has fallen here, we're going to see next week what happens to an individual who falls but still has a heart for God. And so I can't wait. Read the next chapter, 2 Samuel chapter 12, and we're going to look at that on next Wednesday. May the Lord continue to bless you and keep you. Please continue to be safe, mask up, sanitize up. Certain numbers are still increasing involving this COVID-19, and we got to be careful and be good stewards of the health the Lord has blessed us with. God bless you till I see you next time. Be good.